Father Hesse.
Yeah.
There is a movement in the United States, Sedevacantists.
Say what?
Sedevacantists.
Sedevacantists, yeah.
That there hasn't been a pope since the 12th, Pius XII.
Yeah.
That because they feel that the popes were Masonic, they could not be pope, and they don't recognize the chair has been vacant. What is your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the church teaching is very clear on that. We have to distinguish again between matters of discipline and matters of faith. You will see why. Now, and we have to distinguish between objective heresy and subjective heresy, and between material heresy and formal heresy. Let's take up the question first, what happens if a pope is secretly a member of the Freemasonry? Would he cease to be pope? No. He's just committing a grave sin and he's excommunicated, and only he can absolve himself from that. But
he's excommunicated.
Yeah, personally.
And he can still be pope?
Personally, sure. If a pope commits, for example, if Pope Alexander VI, famous, the Borgia Pope, if he had attempted to absolve the concubine he spent the last night with in confession, he would have been solemnly excommunicated, reserved to the Holy See. Does that make him cease to be Pope? No. A Pope does not cease to be Pope because he's in sin. Not even when it's public sin. A Pope ceases to be Pope when he is in formal heresy. Canon law always stated, and the new code of canon law says the same thing. Someone who is objectively in heresy, who is in formal heresy, who is in the subjective sin of heresy, cannot hold office. But I explained on another occasion that as long as the Pope does not make his heresies, and there are enough of them, as long as he does not make his heresies formal, he's Pope. He's just a man who is in error, who says the wrong things, but does not say this is a new teaching, a new doctrine, and I say this in spite of the councils before. He doesn't want to contradict. See, I told you about the mistaken concept of tradition the present Pope has. Now, within this mistaken concept of tradition, the mistaken concept on a tradition that changes with the times and with the understanding of the faithful and their studies and their experiences, quoting again De Verbum 8, the Pope will say certain things that are against church doctrine, but he will always say in accordance to tradition. See, for him, Vatican II is the second coming of the Holy Spirit, and therefore, whatever that means, and it's a second Pentecost, or as Pope Paul VI said, and the present Pope never gets tired of quoting Pope Paul VI on it, it's a council almost as important as the Council of Nicaea, or maybe even more important. So these people just totally overrate the so-called teachings of Vatican II, and they think that this is now tradition because tradition knows progress. So when the Pope says something that seems to be against the doctrine of the Church as pronounced by the popes of the 19th and the 20th century before, and the Church for 2,000 years, as a matter of fact, this is just because of the change and the progress in tradition. So they make it manifest that they do not want to be heretics. They make it, Pope John Paul II makes it abundantly clear that he does not want to contradict the definitions of the Council of Trent, but to interpret them in a new way that is fitting to our present times. That makes him a material heretic. It means the heresy is there. The matter of heresy is there. The heresy is there. But the intention is not there. And if I do not know and do not see, I cannot commit a sin. I cannot commit a mortal sin unless I know, want to, and in a grave matter. That's the definition of mortal sin. And heresy is a mortal sin. It's one of the worst sins possible. But there have to be three conditions. Grave matter. Well, matter of the faith is always grave matter. Knowledge and intention. To be quite frank with you, the present Pope is a very lousy theologian because his philosophy is all screwed up. And I doubt he knows what he's saying. Doesn't make you a formal heretic.
Well, you believe he's the Pope.
Yeah, that's the reason why. Because you see, when the Dr. Martin Luther said, the church is wrong, and I say, he immediately was a heretic. He knew it, he wanted it, and the matter was there.
But you must follow the Pope now.
You must what?
You must follow the Pope.
I must follow the Pope in everything that is not against church tradition. But if it is against church, and mind you, I have to prove it. The Pope doesn't have to prove anything to me. I have to prove to him that he's wrong. Well, that's pretty easy with him, I honestly tell you, because I just read the syllabus of Pius IX, and there you have the same thing that the present Pope says, except that Pius IX condemned it. So that leads me to a very important point before I finally answer the question on sedis vacancy, on the Sedevacantist. I have to prove that the Pope is wrong. He does not have to prove to me that he is Catholic and that what he says is according to church tradition. I have to prove to him that he's wrong, and I can do that. But I cannot do it quoting theologians, or myself even. That'd be the worst thing. If I was to say, John Paul II says, but I say, then I'm just disobedient theologian, nothing else. But I do not contradict the present Pope with anything but his predecessors. When I say that the present Pope is wrong when he says that the Spirit of Christ does not refrain from giving salvation to the efforts of the Protestant churches, I quote Pope Eugene IV, I quote the Council of Trent, I quote Pope Pius IX. When I contradict the present Pope saying, when he says the church is not one, we have to unite the church. And now we have a sister church in Russia, and we have a sister church there, then I just quote Pope Pius XI, Mortalium Animus, against him. And if the present Pope says that at the moment of death, the death on the cross, Christ symbolically descended to hell with his body because his body was in the grave, then he contradicts the Fourth Lateran Council. Not me. He contradicts the Fourth Lateran Council that defined as a dogma of the faith. I'm quoting, by the way, a speech of January 11th, 1987. He contradicts what the Fourth Lateran Council defined as a dogma, that the moment Christ died on the cross, his soul descended to hell. Now the term hell means the waiting place for the just of the Old Testament. There's no discussion on that. And his body couldn't. His body was in the grave. But then John Paul II says the moment Christ died, he had the beatific vision. And we talk about his descendants to hell because his body was in the grave. That's against what the church teaches. Also, it's against church tradition that Christ would have received the beatific vision at the moment of his death on the cross. He had it from the very moment of conception, because he's the second person of God, united in the hypostatic union with the nature, with human nature, but in the same person. There's two natures, but the same person. There is his divine nature, and there's human nature in Christ, and they're united in the very same person of Jesus Christ, who had the beatific vision all of his life, who never ceased to have it, who never ceased for a moment to have it. And then the Pope comes up and says he received it at the moment of death. You see, this is a contradiction. And it's not I who proves the Pope wrong. It's not I who judges the Pope. I don't judge the Pope. I don't prove anything here. I just quote the councils and the predecessors of this Pope. And if I have a statement from the Fourth Lateran Council, the Council of Florence, the Council of Trent, and First Vatican Council, and then I have a statement by John Paul II that says the contrary, I know who's right. The councils before, because they define dogmas. John Paul is just writing speeches.
What about, Father, the new catechism?
Before we come to the new catechism, why is it that he's still Pope when he does all these things? Well, first of all, because, as I said, he does not make the intention manifest to be a heretic. See, the famous heretics in the old days would always say, they would always come out saying, the church is wrong when the church teaches this and this and this. I say, it's very clear that the intention to go against church teaching is clear and manifest. The Pope never said that. John Paul II never said that he wanted to go against what the church teaches. On the contrary, I'm sick and tired of it, but he still will tell you that everything he says is in accordance with church tradition. Well, it isn't, but he says so. So he has no intention of being a heretic. And therefore he's not a formal heretic. Now, it is the excellent comment on the new Code of Canon Law issued by the Canon Law Society of America that says if a pope was to be in formal heresy, he would cease to be pope, but then opinions are divided on what we would have to do in that case. However, the Sedevacantists are not just satisfied with the document on material and formal heresy. They will quote Pope Paul IV, I think it was, or Paul V. The document is called Cum ex Apostolatus Officio. That's the title of the document. It's a document which enjoys all the infallibility it could have. It's a document that uses all the legal formulas for an infallible document. That means the Pope says, I, in virtue of my apostolic authority, herewith declare, define, and statute that, and that, and that, and that, and that, and that has to be held and believed by all people forever. And in that document, which also rules on the election of a future Pope, on the conclave, it says that no cardinal, if he is a heretic or was a heretic, can be validly elected to the papacy. Many Sedevacantists use this document as the definite proof that John the 23rd, who in their eyes was a heretic before his election, they use this as the proof that John the 23rd, having been a heretic before his election, could not be validly elected. They are quite wrong on that, because again, this is why I said you have to be careful about the distinction between matters of discipline, matters of faith. Pope Paul V, with his Cum ex Apostolatus Officio, was able to bind all of his successors forever in everything that concerns moral or dogmatic teaching in his document. To rule on the election of a future pope is not a moral decision. It is not a decision on moral theology. It is not a decision of faith. It's not a matter of morals or faith. It is the ruling of a canonical election. That means you talk about an act of administration. You talk about an administrative ruling, and that cannot, because it's mere disciplinary, cannot bind his successors. And indeed, the many successors to Paul V, who came up with new regulations on the conclave, including St. Pius X, never mentioned that paragraph again. So it's not taken up anymore. And I think if the question of a former heretic or a material heretic not being able to become pope was something that the popes cannot change, then we're probably in sedisvacancy for many centuries already. See, the present pope is not the first heretic in church history.
Let me come back with a little bit.
Yeah.
If I kill someone and feel that that will be better for the world, there'll be a good come out of it, I didn't intend to cause murder, so will I be committing a mortal sin?
Objectively, definitely yes. Subjectively, I don't see any escape for you, because the church made it quite clear that you must not do that. You know it, you wanted to do it, and it's a grave matter.
But why doesn't that apply to a pope?
Because because that's a very different matter, you see. To kill somebody under certain circumstances is always murder. under certain circumstances. To pronounce an error means always to pronounce an error, no matter what circumstances. But heresy, the word heresy in itself, means the intention of contradicting church doctrine. Otherwise, you do not deal with the sin of heresy.
Who killed Jesus Christ?
Who killed Jesus Christ? The Jews.
Well, didn't we just apologize to them for that?
I'm not overly interested in all the Pope's apologies, which I'm quite sick and tired by now, because he now apologizes to everybody. He never apologized to me for having reinforced the new Mass, and celebrating the new Mass. But I'm the only person whom he never apologizes.
But doesn't the Bible state that the Jews killed Jesus Christ?
The Bible says so, and as a matter of fact, the Bible is even is quite clear on it when as a matter of fact, Christ was very clear about it when he said, "My blood will come unto you and all your." Okay, so and Saint Paul is very, very clear.
Well, then how can he apologize to the Jews?
Because the new church policy, the church which not I, but John Paul II calls the Church of the New Advent. I'm quoting Redemptor Hominis, his first encyclical, in which, by the way, he never mentions the word Catholic Church or Roman Catholic. He speaks about the Church of the New Advent, the Conciliar Church, and the conscience of the Church. The conscience of the Church, a disastrous concept of a sort of foggy nature of the Church, dating back to Pope Paul VI's encyclical Ecclesiam Suam, another disaster in the history of church documents. Pope John Paul II, just in his church, in this Church of the New Advent, as he calls it, he thinks that we have to be nice and kind to everybody. Very soon, the Fatima Crusader will have an article on that topic, theology of being nice and kind. But
but isn't that heretical?
It is.
In his catechism,
it is.
That a Jew, an atheist, can be saved.
It is. It is. Yeah. But if you cannot turn that into formal heresy, because the members of the Church of the New Advent, they understand this to be in perfect accordance with what the Church always taught, saying, when Pope Eugene IV said that nobody who is in schism or in heresy can ever be saved, they were talking just about appearances, which is a foggy concept of the word objective. Now, I myself have not ceased to underline the fact that when Pope Eugene IV says anybody who is in schism or in heresy, even if he was to shed his blood for Christ, cannot be saved, I'm talking about objective judgment. But you see, the point is, the Church of the New Advent does not use distinctions. The Church of the New Advent, headed by John Paul II, will always talk about as if objective and subjective were the same, material and formal the same, act and potency the same. This is why on many occasions I have insisted on these distinctions. There are many things that you are not allowed to say unless you make a distinction clear. And I'll give you the most obvious example. If I was to say to you right now, I am Pope, is that true or not?
It's not true.
Yes, sir, it is true. Potentially I am Pope. The probability is equal to zilch. The probability, but not the possibility. Potentially I am Pope. Potentially.
If you say
I could become a bishop, a cardinal.
Yeah.
No, I could be Pope. I could become a bishop, then a cardinal, be elected Pope, right? So potentially I'm a Pope.
Right.
But you said very rightly that I am wrong, because you understood what I said the way I said it. The usage of language is a law. It's not just a mere convention. It's not something that's just there. It's a law that binds you. The usage of language binds you. You have to follow the rules of a language. And in the usage of language, no matter what language you speak, English, German, Italian, whatever, in the usage of language, you do not name things that are only in potency without saying so. Can you imagine how scandalized the people would say if I was to tell them at the same time, I'm Pope and the physical father of many children? Potentially I am, of course. I could break my vows of chastity and my promise of celibacy and have a lot of children. I could also become Pope if I'm made a bishop and a cardinal and elected. But I'm not allowed to say I'm the father of many children without explaining what I mean. This is the whole point. Now, Pope John Paul II, on uncountable occasions in his encyclicals, especially Dives in Misericordia, will tell you that all people are saved. And that's the same thing what I just did. Is it true that all people are saved? No, it is not. But is it true that all people are saved potentially? Yes. Christ dying on the cross made it possible for all people to be saved. That does not include the slightest probability. It's only a chance. Our Lady in Fatima showed very clearly that hell is not only not empty, but highly populated. It's a popular place, as you would call it. So many people did not make it, that's for sure. We don't know who. But many people have not been saved and will not be saved.
On the matter of Muslims, atheists, can be saved. Can a traditional Catholic be saved?
Well, I get the impression that according to the Church of the New Advent, we are now the only ones who are not Catholic and cannot be saved.
Would be the only one in jeopardy of losing his soul.
Probably. I don't know what they really want, and I'm not interested. See, I follow the Church, I follow the popes. I'm interested in what the Church teaches. And when Archbishop, let me explain something here. When Archbishop Lefebvre uses the year 1958, you will always see with the Society of St. Pius X or Archbishop Lefebvre, they will always tell you 1958, 1958, 1958. Now, they are not Sedevacantists, definitely not. And it would be slander to call them Sedevacantists. They are not. They pray for the Pope every day in their chapels, publicly, and I'm a witness to that because I have done it in their chapels for them.
I'm a witness also.
Yes. And the reason why Archbishop Lefebvre says 1958 is for practical reasons. The changes in the Church did not come about 1958, period. The liturgical changes started in Germany 1917, in the United States 1920s, 1930s. In Austria in the 1930s, they said Mass in the vernacular versus populum, towards the people. The actual changes in the Missale Romanum started under Pius XII, when in 1949 Holy Week was destroyed, in my eyes destroyed, but it's substantially there.
Why do you say Holy Week was destroyed? What happened?
Just a second, let's first answer the 1958 question. And then, of course, there was the 1962 Missal and 1965 Missal and 1967 Missal, and then you had the new Mass of Paul VI in 1969, 1970 edition. You had the vernacular versions come out in 1974 following, and now they're talking about another reform, just like in the old days, 1517 Germany, with the Herr Dr. Martin Luther. And so the changes came about gradually, needless to say. The point why Archbishop Lefebvre always says 1958 is very simple. Until 1958, there was not one official church document that was wrong. Pope Pius XII never wrote anything that was wrong, as far as I can judge, and I'm not just referring to my own judgment. After that, with John the 23rd coming in and ridiculous documents like Pacem in Terris, things started to change. So they're not reliable anymore. And 1958 is a good way for the people who do not want to go into the details of all the history. To remember, it's very practical for them to remember 1958 as the date of the change. So they know if a church document is dated before 1958, they can trust it. If it's dated after 1958, it might still be right, but they cannot trust it. And that is why 1958 was used as it's always used by Archbishop Lefebvre and by the Society of St. Pius X. Now, Holy Week, see, you have to be very careful about that. Some people, I recorded a tape last year, and some people quoted me saying that I do not celebrate the Mass of 1962. And they said, very good, Father Hesse does not celebrate the Mass of 1962 because the Mass of 1962 is definitely not the Mass of St. Pius V. Wrong again. Wrong again. I just said that the official changes, printed changes in the Missal, changes that would make you doubt that the rule of St. Pius V was kept, started in 1949. I would never say that 1962 is unacceptable. And I can explain to you in very, very shortly and very simply why the Society of St. Pius X, namely Archbishop Lefebvre, decided to use the 1962 Missal. There are rules. There are rules in the Church. And one of the highest rules in moral theology is that self-defense will always be content with the minimum necessary in order to get rid of the situation you want to get rid of. See, if somebody calls you an idiot, you can't shoot him for that. Like at the same time, if I see a woman is raped on the other sidewalk, I can't say, honey, I'll be back in an hour from now. I have to act right now. There are rules to self-defense. When Archbishop Lefebvre consecrated 4 bishops in 1988, he knew he was not going to live for long anymore. Matter of fact, he made it until 1991. And he knew the moment he realized that Rome was going to trick him into something, he decided on acting right now in self-defense. At the same time, if he claims the rules of self-defense, then he has to stick to the rules of self-defense. The 1962 Missal, according to Archbishop Lefebvre, according to Father Schmidberger, who was his successor as the Superior General, and according to my own view, is the last acceptable book. Because after that, the changes were visibly too many and too drastic to make it credible that you're talking about the same Missal and the same book and the same Mass. However, I am not bound to these laws of self-defense. And what Pius XII did with Holy Week is something that I cannot accept. If a future pope was going to say, Father Hesse, you will say the Mass of 1962, I will say, yes, sir, and do it. With a bleeding heart, but I will do it. Because it's acceptable. If he was to say to me, you're going to celebrate the Mass of 1967, or you're going to celebrate the new Mass, I will say, Your Holiness, you do not have the competence to say this because of what I explained earlier. The Pope is bound. And I think he's bound a lot more than what we believe him to be. When Pius XII allowed the Missa Praesanctificatorum, the Mass of the Pre-Sanctified of Good Friday, to be turned into the liturgy of a word, which is what happened, I think, but I'm a theologian, not a pope, I think he exceeded the limits of his competence. You see, it was Archbishop Lefebvre who decided on the 1962 Missal, not the Pope. The Pope came up with the so-called indult on the 1962 Mass only after Archbishop Lefebvre had decided that the 1962 Mass is the last acceptable version. I've studied the different versions of Mass, and some things in the 1962 Missal strike me as almost unacceptable, but not entirely unacceptable. The 1965 version, where you have all the propers in vernacular, and the Judica Me Psalm, the Psalm 42, at the beginning is gone, and the last gospel is gone. Now that, I'm sorry, is too much. But the changes of the 1962 Missal, as regrettable as they are, under the laws of emergency, would have to be followed. But I'm not under that law of emergency. The future Pope will have to decide what we use.
There is a picture of the Pope kissing the Quran.
Yes. Public act of apostasy.
And he calls it a holy book.
It's a public act of apostasy. If I had scientifically irrefutable proof that act of apostasy would be a formal act of apostasy, I would side with the Sedevacantist. Sedevacantists, I'm
All right,
sorry
now.
to call them.
There's no doubt that he kissed the Koran.
Yeah, there's no doubt.
Is there any doubt that he called it a holy book?
No.
Now, how do you make that distinction that he was a formal heretic?
People who have studied recent American history are witness to the fact that a president can say a lot of nonsense. Does he cease to be president? I know the argument is a president doesn't lose his office by being a heretic. In the church, you lose your office by being a heretic.
I would say if you can lose your office by being treasonous.
That's an excellent argument.
He subverts the government. What would be the difference?
In this century, the 20th century, which has not ended last December 31st, but will end this December 31st, for those who have a spark of mathematics left in their memory, because it was called the 20th century, and the 20th century cannot end in 1999. Doesn't change the fact that the 20th century has given ample proof for treacherous people being heads of states without losing their office. Now, we are here actually touching another question which you might have in your list of questions, I don't know. But we are actually touching another question here. Do we have a pope, yes or no? I have only one answer to this, and I will repeatedly give this answer. As long as I do not have scientifically irrefutable proof that this present pope is not pope, I will hold him as such. Why? Papal pronouncements on when a pope, not just when somebody loses his office, but when a pope loses his office, have been scarce, to say the least. Very few popes, unfortunately, because I do not believe it, but very few popes have contradicted the theory that the pope is above canon law. Mind you, I'm quoting even church doctors. Forgive me, I don't have the page, I don't have the author, I don't have the book. But it's an old saying, the Pope is above canon law. Pope Pius IX said about himself, I am tradition, which is impossible. But of course, a mental error is no impediment to sanctity. However, Pope Pius IX said, I am tradition. I don't believe that. I don't believe that a single pope can be tradition. Impossible. The popes have, unfortunately, been very, very, even contradictory on this subject. When the Bishop of Brixen, in 1869, asked Pius IX, what will happen? They were discussing the infallibility to be pronounced as a dogma. And Pius IX was asked by the Bishop of Brixen, what will happen if a future pope was to pronounce heresy? Pius IX didn't say he would lose his office. Now this is in writing, and you can find it in the famous collection of papal pronouncements or papal private correspondence. The collection is, for those who like footnotes, M-A-N-S-I, Mike Alpha November Sierra India, Mansi. And it's in the 5,000s. I wish I had a better memory for things like this. It's 5,500 something, if I remember well. The quotation, Pius IX says, oh, you just don't follow him. He doesn't say this guy loses his office. He doesn't say he ceases to be pope. He says, okay, well, then you just don't follow him. But just like St. Thomas Aquinas said, if your prelate is wrong, you just can't follow him.
But isn't there another document that speaks of something like if the Pope does something heretical, he's no longer Pope?
No, wait a second. You can't do something heretical. You can only pronounce
something heretical.
Yeah.
That he is no longer
The
Pope.
point is, canon law presumes that you are a formal heretic. That's canon law, anyway. Moral theology, like Prima, for example, or Wernz or Vidal, say that discussing the topic, discussing the issue of a pope losing his office, say only if he's in formal heresy. That's we don't have the time here, and we would have to go for 5 hours to discuss these arguments. No, what I have to say, no, I'm fully satisfying you, because you will see that this is what you were asking.
No, it was not what I was asking.
No, I'm sorry. You said
someone has brought up that
yeah.
you evade an issue, that there is a document that says that when the Pope commits something, a heresy, all right, he is no longer Pope ipso facto.
No, I didn't say that.
No, I am saying there is a document to that.
Yes, right.
And people.
Yeah, there are many documents to this point.
Okay.
Saint Robert Bellarmine, who is at least a doctor of the Church, right? Saint Robert Bellarmine says even if a pope was to pronounce just material heresy, he would ipso facto cease to be pope.
Oh, okay, why doesn't that hold?
The point I'm making is there have been so many contradicting theories on this subject. Take, for example, this, even though I don't accept it, it's there. And if I accept it or not is not the point. It's there. The old saying that the Pope is above canon law. If the Pope is above canon law, you cannot apply canon law on him. Who would do that anyway? Canon 333, paragraph 3 of the New Code of Canon Law, and that's an almost literal copy from the relevant canon in the Old Canon Law, says, contra summum pontificem recursus non datur. There is no appeal against the Roman pontiff. So the oldest problem as to this topic, does a pope cease to be pope when he becomes a heretic? The oldest problem is not to determine is he a heretic or not, but to determine if he's pope or not. Who's going to do that? And you see, this is the whole point. Archbishop Lefebvre, again, pronounced pretty well on this subject. He was asked, of course, you can imagine, the seminarians in Econ, they had the same problems. And they knew most of the arguments back and forth, against and for. And they asked him, and he said, Archbishop Lefebvre said very clearly, he said they have excellent arguments. There are very good arguments to believe that he is not pope. But when you consider canon law, which certainly applies to us, obviously it's not that sure if it applies pope, but it certainly concerns us. Then you have to consider the fact that the pope doesn't have to prove anything to us. The onus probandi, this is called in Latin, the burden of proof lies with us. It might as well be, and I firmly believe, I'm firmly convinced that the Sedevacantists have much better arguments for their viewpoint than we have for upholding the Pope. They have much better arguments. But who's going to decide on that? Who's going to decide on that? Who decided on the arguments for Immaculate Conception and against Immaculate Conception? I don't believe it was a priest from Vienna speaking to John Maffei in Philadelphia. You see? The point is, I have discussed this extensively with many theologians. I've discussed it with theologians who are really erudite. I've also discussed it with theologians who, especially on the telephone, try nothing else but to hook me up on my own lines by stating the contrary. I've discussed it with serious people, and I've discussed it with less than serious people. I do know from my reading, some Sedevacantists have gone through the trouble of writing excellent, usually theologically very erudite theses on this topic. The very fact that I'm not convinced is completely sufficient for my mentioning the Pope in the canon. Because even if I personally was convinced that he is not Pope, you think I'm stupid? If I mention John Paul II in the canon, and at the Last Judgment I find out he wasn't Pope, what is God going to do to me? Nothing. But what if I firmly believe that he is not Pope, and I don't mention him in the canon anymore, and at the last judgment I find out he was Pope? Uh-oh. The burden of proof is something of a very decisive nature in sensitive issues like that. This is one of the reasons we discussed the validity of ordination. The Pope doesn't have to prove to me that I've been validly ordained, and I don't have to prove to you that I've been validly ordained. The other part has to produce the proof. The burden of proof doesn't lie with the one that is presumed to be right by the law. The burden of proof lies with the one who challenges it. That's not just true in canon law, it's true in all logical civil laws. The Pope, for example, I mean, of course this is not a conclusive argument if he actually holds the office of being Peter and Vicar of Christ, but the Pope is recognized as a head of state by a three-digit number of countries. Now, the one who challenges that is the one who has to present the proof. If the President of the United States says, okay, now I'm going to appoint a new ambassador to the Vatican, he doesn't have to produce proof that there is a head of state in the Vatican. And he doesn't have to produce proof that the Vatican is a recognized state or that the Catholic Church is a recognized institution. Some things are presumed. And if you do not follow the presumption, you have to produce the proof. Now, I say it again, the Sedevacantists do have the better arguments than we have. But are they conclusive? I don't think so. And even if they were conclusive, who is going to establish by authority that this is the case?